In the quiet hours of twilight, when the sun set in melancholy hues over the Pacific, Pete Mitchell, Maverick, often found himself on the porch of his oceanfront home. The years had carved deep lines into his face, marks of countless hours under the sun and the pull of gravity, but his blue eyes still held the distant glow of skies few dared to conquer. The salty breeze carried with it not only the scent of the ocean, but also whispers of a past that refused to be forgotten. Among those whispers, one name resonated with particular frequency, a name that, for many, had been erased from history, but that for Maverick remained etched with the strength of legend. Evelyn Valkyrie Reed. He had met her at a time when the sky was still a territory to be explored, not just by machines, but by souls. Valkyrie was not just a pilot. She was a force of nature, an anomaly in a male-dominated world, who piloted with an intuition and audacity that defied logic and physics. Her maneuvers were aerial ballets, her decisions three-dimensional chess moves. Maverick, who considered himself a master of the art of flight, saw in her a mirror and at the same time a challenge. She was the embodiment of freedom and innovation, a woman who not only broke barriers but pulverized them with the force of her will and the precision of her hands on the joystick. But the Valkyrie legend did not end in glory. It ended in deafening silence, in a classified incident that wiped her from the annals of aviation as if she had never existed. The official version was a web of half-truths and omissions, a convenient narrative that served to protect bigger, darker secrets. Maverick never bought that story. He had seen too much, felt too much to accept that a pilot of Valkyrie's stature could simply make such a catastrophic, inexplicable mistake. There was something more, something that time and bureaucracy had conspired to bury. That night, as the waves crashed rhythmically against the shore, Maverick felt an urgent urge. It was as if Valkyrie's spirit was calling to him, demanding that the truth finally be revealed. He had spent years carrying the weight of this unresolved secret, the injustice of a tarnished reputation. Now retirement gave him the time, and the wisdom of age, the perspective. He knew that unearthing this story would not be easy. It would involve revisiting ghosts, confronting inconvenient truths, and perhaps even putting himself at risk. But for Valkyrie, for the truth, he was willing to pay the price. Maverick stood, his movement slow but determined. The house was filled with memories, dusty photographs that told stories of camaraderie, of daring flights, of lives lived on the edge. In a faded frame hung a photo of Valkyrie, young and radiant, with the defiant smile he so admired. The image was a constant reminder that some legends deserved more than oblivion. They deserved the truth. He walked to his small library, a shrine to the books and documents he had accumulated over the years. There, among flight reports and pilot biographies, he knew he would find the first clues, the loose threads that would lead him to the tangle of truth. The search for Valkyrie was not just a matter of justice, it was a matter of honor, a debt to a soul who had soared higher than anyone, only to be brought down by unseen forces. Maverick knew that Valkyrie's story was more than just an aviation incident. It was a parable about the cost of innovation, the fragility of reputation, and how truth can be manipulated to serve hidden agendas. He felt that in telling her story, he was telling a part of the story of all who dared to push the envelope, of all who were silenced in the name of a greater good or a deeper secret. He picked up an old logbook, its pages yellowed with age. In it were notes about Valkyrie's early flights, her insightful commentary on the performance of her aircraft, and the unwavering passion she showed for each machine she piloted. Maverick flipped through the pages, feeling the energy of that time, the effervescence of innovation, and the promise of a limitless future. It was a painful contrast to the silence that had followed Valkyrie's downfall. Project Phoenix, the name that had become a forbidden whisper in the halls of power, was the epicenter of the Valkyrie legend. It was an experimental aircraft, a quantum leap in aviation technology designed to redefine the limits of flight. Valkyrie was the lead test pilot, the only one capable of taming the metal beast and pushing it to its limits. Maverick remembered the conversations in the hangars, the looks of admiration and envy that followed her. She was the embodiment of the future, and the future was sometimes too dangerous to reveal. He sat in his favorite chair, the moonlight, streaming through the window and illuminating the journal in his hands. The Valkyrie story was a puzzle, and Maverick felt that each piece was there, waiting to be found and fitted together. He was no longer the brash young pilot who defied the rules. He was a historian, a keeper of memory, and his mission now was to ensure that the truth, no matter how painful, did not remain buried. The wind outside howled, as if the very air currents of the Pacific were eager for Valkyrie's story to be told. Maverick closed his eyes for a moment, visualizing the skies, the clouds, the impossible maneuvers Valkyrie performed. He could almost feel the roar of the engines, the rush of speed, the freedom that only flight could provide. And then, the image of the crash, the abrupt silence, the darkness that swallowed the legend. He opened his eyes, determined. The journey would be long, but the truth was worth every step. He knew that many had tried to unravel Valkyrie's mystery before him and had failed. But Maverick had an advantage. He knew her. He had flown with her, raced with her, and respected her like few others. That personal connection would be the key to unlocking the puzzle. He picked up his laptop, an old but reliable model, and began typing. The first few words flowed easily, as if the story was waiting to be released. He wasn't just writing, he was reliving it, feeling every emotion, every moment of glory and tragedy. Maverick's voice, now retired, was in the third person, with indirect discourse, as if he were recalling untold stories of aviation, espionage, or military secrets. The tone was cinematic, emotional, patriotic, with tension and mystery. It could include romance, military secrets, experimental science, heroic characters or betrayed characters. The focus was on the human emotion behind the machines and secrets. Trauma, loyalty, love, guilt, fear, glory. He knew that Valkyrie's story was a reminder that not all heroes wear uniforms, and not all battles are fought in the sky. Some of the most important struggles happen behind the scenes, in the corridors of power, where truth is a bargaining chip and reputation is an easy target. But truth, as Maverick always believed, had a way of emerging, no matter how deeply it was buried. He leaned forward, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Part 1 was taking shape, and with it, the promise of a revelation. He knew the audience would be eager to unravel this mystery along with him. And like a good storyteller, he knew the first step was to invite the audience along for the ride. Before we begin, drop in the comments where you're tuning in from and hit that like button if you believe some stories were never meant to be buried. Maverick smiled. Valkyrie's story was just beginning to be told, and he was ready to be its herald. The echo of a forgotten legend was about to resonate again, louder than ever. Maverick, immersed in the dusty archives, felt the weight of history in his hands. Every flight report, every technical note about Project Phoenix, was a fragment of the life of Evelyn Reed, Valkyrie. He was on an archaeological journey, unearthing not just facts, but the essence of a woman who had defied the skies and expectations. The early records showed a pilot with a dizzying learning curve, an innate ability to understand the machine not just as a set of systems, but as an extension of herself. She didn't fly, she danced with the wind, transforming the complexity of engineering into a symphony of motion and speed. Project Phoenix, to which Valkyrie devoted the most productive years of her life, was more than a plane. It was a dream, a promise of air supremacy that bordered on science fiction. Conceived in secret, funded with shadowy funds and developed by a team of scientists and engineers as brilliant as they were eccentric, the Phoenix was the cutting edge of what was possible. Its fuselage, made of an ultra-light and durable composite material, and its engines, which used a hybrid propulsion technology not yet revealed to the public, promised unprecedented speed and agility. Valkyrie was the only one that could extract the maximum potential, pushing the limits of the machine and, by extension, his own. Maverick found a series of reports signed by a chief engineer, Dr. Aris Thorne. Thorne's notes were meticulous, almost poetic, describing the symbiosis between Valkyrie and Phoenix. He spoke of how she sensed the nuances of airflow, how she anticipated the aircraft's reactions before the sensors even registered them. Thorne was an idealist, a visionary who believed that technology should serve humanity, not the other way around. He saw in Valkyrie not just a test pilot, but the embodiment of his own ambition to transcend the limits of engineering. His notes revealed a deep, almost reverent admiration for her, and a growing discomfort with the political and military pressures that were beginning to surround the project. The project, initially a purely scientific endeavor, began to attract the attention of high-ranking figures in the Pentagon. The promise of an aircraft that could be invisible to radar and perform impossible maneuvers was too tempting to ignore. But with military interest came bureaucracy, pressure for quick results, and growing paranoia about information security. Maverick read about the tense meetings, tight deadlines, and unrealistic demands that were placed on Thorne's team and, by extension, on Valkyrie. Among the documents, Maverick discovered references to an intelligence officer, Colonel Silas Vance. Vance was Thorne's opposite, pragmatic, skeptical, and ruthless. He saw Project Phoenix not as a scientific breakthrough, but as a weapon, and Valkyrie as a tool. His reports were cold and calculating, focused on schedules, costs, and risks. Vance distrusted Valkyrie's genius, seeing her as an unpredictable element in a project he wanted tightly controlled. There was an underlying tension between him and Thorne, a silent battle between science and safety, innovation and control. Maverick also found mention of a rival pilot, Captain Marcus Shadow, Thorne, Aris's cousin. Shadow was a talented pilot, but his career had always been overshadowed by Valkyrie. He was envious of her success and the attention she received, especially on Project Phoenix. Reports indicated that Shadow frequently questioned Valkyrie's decisions, tried to undermine her authority, and even spread rumors about her recklessness. His presence added a layer of personal intrigue to the already complex dynamics of the project. The Phoenix's test flights were legendary. Valkyrie took the aircraft to speeds and altitudes that would give any other pilot pause. She tested the limits of the airframe, the engines, and the control systems, all with impressive calm. Maverick found a detailed report of one particular flight, a high-speed maneuverability test. The Phoenix had at one point entered an uncontrollable inverted spin. Onboard systems failed, alarms sounded, and the control tower panicked. Valkyrie's voice, however, remained calm, almost serene, as she fought to regain control. She described every sensation, every vibration, every attempted correction, as if she were narrating a scientific experiment rather than a fight for her life. Maverick could almost hear the controller's breathless intake of breath, the tense silence in the control room. He knew that in situations like this, most pilots would eject. But Valkyrie did not. She persisted, using a combination of intuition and a deep understanding of aerodynamics to find a flaw in the flight control system that had been overlooked by the engineers. With a risky maneuver, she managed to stabilize the aircraft just a few feet above the ground, landing it safely, but with the fuselage smoking and the onboard systems in disarray. The apparent success of this flight, however, revealed the fragility of Project Phoenix. The failure was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of deeper problems, perhaps even sabotage. Thorne's report on the incident was alarming, pointing to a design flaw that could have been fatal. But Vance's report, on the other hand, downplayed the incident, praising Valkyrie's expertise but ignoring the implications of the system. Failure. The pressure to move the project forward, to get the Phoenix ready for high-level demonstrations, was immense. And Valkyrie, the only one who could fly the Phoenix, felt the weight of that pressure on her shoulders. Maverick felt a chill as he read between the lines. That flight, which should have been a triumph, was actually an omen. Valkyrie's genius, her ability to save the Phoenix from disaster, made her even more valuable, but it also put her in a dangerous position. She was the key to the project's success, but she was also the only one who could expose its flaws. And in a world where secrets were more valuable than lives, that made her a target. The shadow of Project Phoenix, which was supposed to be a symbol of innovation, was beginning to loom over Valkyrie, threatening to swallow her whole. The days following the inverted screw incident were marked by an intense internal investigation. Maverick found transcripts of interrogations where Valkyrie, with her usual calm, described the events with surgical precision. She didn't dodge questions or try to minimize the risks she had taken. Her honesty was brutal, and that, Maverick could tell, didn't sit well with everyone, especially Vance, who seemed more concerned with controlling the narrative than understanding the technical truth. Thorne, for his part, defended Valkyrie vehemently, presenting data and analysis that corroborated her version of the system failure. He argued that the incident was a wake-up call, proof that the Phoenix needed more development time, more rigorous testing. But his voice seemed to be lost in the chorus of forced optimism and the rush to present results. Shadow, the envious cousin, seized the opportunity to sow doubts about Valkyrie's ability to handle the pressure, suggesting that she was reckless and that her methods were dangerous. Maverick could see the web tightening around Valkyrie. She was an artist, an innovator, and she was being forced to operate in an environment where politics and ambition trumped science and safety. With every page he read, every report he reviewed, the picture of Valkyrie became more complex. Not just a legendary pilot, but a woman under immense pressure, fighting to maintain her integrity in a system that seemed determined to break her. He closed the file, the dry sound of the paper echoing in the silence of his library. Part 2 of Valkyrie's story was clear in his mind. It was the story of a meteoric rise, of an unwavering passion for aviation, but also of the growing shadow of a project that would become her undoing. The tension was building, the characters introduced, and the stage was set for the fateful day that would change everything. Maverick felt a lump in his throat. He knew what was coming next, and it was not an easy story to tell. The wind outside had died down, and the full moon was illuminating the ocean, turning the waves to liquid. "Silver!" Maverick stared into the darkness, picturing Valkyrie in the sky, silhouetted against the stars before the shadow of the Phoenix swallowed her. He knew the truth was a winding path, full of detours and dead ends, but he was determined to walk it not just for Valkyrie, but for all those whose stories had been buried in the name of greater secrets. Valkyrie's legend deserved to be rewritten, and Maverick was ready to take up the pen. August 17th, a day that should have been another milestone in aviation history, became the epitaph for the legend of Evelyn Reed. Maverick, in his relentless pursuit of the truth, reconstructed the events of that fateful day with almost painful precision. He had spoken to ground technicians, to air traffic controllers on duty, to the few who dared to whisper about what they had actually seen. Each testimony, each scrap of information, painted a different picture from the official version, a narrative of heroism and sacrifice that had been deliberately erased. The morning began with palpable tension at the Edwards Flight Test Center. Project Phoenix was scheduled for its final validation flight, a high-altitude, high-speed test that would confirm its readiness for mass production. The atmosphere was one of restrained euphoria mixed with simmering anxiety. Everyone knew that the Phoenix was a temperamental machine, an untamable genius that demanded the utmost of its pilot. And Valkyrie, with her usual calm, was the only one who could tame him. Maverick could imagine Valkyrie at the pre-flight briefing, her eyes focused, absorbing every detail, every weather forecast, every performance parameter. She was not one to beat around the bush, and her voice, though soft, carried the authority of someone who knew the machine better than anyone. Dr. Eris Thorne, the chief engineer, stood beside her, visibly tense. He had spent the night reviewing the data, concerned about a subtle anomaly in the flight control systems that had emerged during the latest tests. He had expressed his concerns to Colonel Vance, but had been summarily ignored. The pressure for the validation flight was too great to be delayed by minor details. Colonel Silas Vance, with his rigid posture and cold gaze, watched everyone with calculating intensity. To him, the flight was a formality, a final stamp on a project that had already consumed millions and promised an invaluable strategic advantage. He didn't see the aircraft as a marvel of engineering, but as a military asset, and Valkyrie as a resource to be utilized. His impatience was almost palpable, and Maverick sensed that his haste would be the catalyst for tragedy. Shadow Thorn, his envious cousin, was present, a forced smile on his lips. He had been passed over for the validation flight, and envy was eating away at him. Maverick knew that Shadow would do anything to see Valkyrie fail, to finally step out of his shadow. This personal rivalry added a layer of poison to the already charged atmosphere. Maverick, in his mind, followed Valkyrie to the Phoenix. The roar of the engines, the smell of kerosene, the vibration of the ground beneath her feet. She inspected the aircraft with a loving, almost maternal touch, as if she were saying goodbye to a child. She knew every screw, every wire, every secret of this machine. And the machine, in turn, seemed to respond to his presence like a wild animal recognizing its master. The flight began uneventfully. The Phoenix took to the skies with impressive grace and speed, leaving a trail of wonder and hope in its wake. Valkyrie reported the parameters in her calm, professional voice, each word a testament to her absolute control. In the control tower, the tension eased, replaced by cautious optimism. Vance allowed himself a rare smile. Thorn, however, remained restless, his eyes fixed on the monitors, searching for the anomaly that was tormenting him. Then it happened. At 60,000 feet, during a high-G maneuver, the Phoenix's flight control systems began to fail. It wasn't an abrupt failure, but a gradual, insidious degradation. Alarms began to blare in Valkyrie's cockpit, and her voice, for the first time, revealed a hint of urgency. "Control! I'm losing pitch control. Actuators are not responding." In the tower, panic set in. Technicians shouted orders, monitors flashed red. Vance, once so confident, was now pale, his voice cracking. Thorn, however, acted with lightning speed. He had foreseen this failure, and his hands flew over the keyboard, trying to find a solution, a patch, anything that might save Valkyrie and the Phoenix. But it was too late. Maverick listened to the black box recordings, Valkyrie's voice, once so calm, now filled with fierce determination. She was fighting, not just to save the aircraft, but to prevent a greater catastrophe. The Phoenix was on a collision course with a densely populated area, and Valkyrie knew she had only seconds to make a decision. She could eject, save her own life, and let the Phoenix crash into innocent civilians. Or she could attempt the impossible, guide the aircraft into an uninhabited area, sacrificing herself in the process. Her last communication was a whisper, barely audible, but Maverick heard it clearly. "I'm diverting. No time." And then silence. A deafening silence that followed the distant boom of the explosion. The Phoenix had crashed in a remote area of the desert, far from any habitation. Valkyrie had made her choice. The aftermath was a whirlwind of misinformation and cover-up. Rescuers found the wreckage of the Phoenix scattered for miles, and Valkyrie's body trapped in the wreckage of the cockpit. The official version, quickly released, was pilot error. Valkyrie, the legendary Valkyrie, had been reckless, had exceeded the aircraft's limits, and her arrogance had led to her death. Thorn's reports, which pointed to a system failure, had been suppressed. Witnesses had been silenced. The truth had been buried under a mountain of red tape and lies. Maverick remembered the feeling of helplessness, the rage that consumed him. He knew it was a lie, a farce orchestrated to protect Project Phoenix, to avoid a scandal that could jeopardize the future of military aviation. Valkyrie, the heroine, had been turned into a scapegoat, her reputation tarnished forever. He had tried to fight. He had tried to expose the truth, but his voice was only a whisper amid the deafening chorus of the official narrative. The silence that followed Valkyrie's downfall was the most painful of all. It wasn't just the absence of her voice, her laughter, her vibrant presence. It was the silence of truth, the silence of justice. Valkyrie's legend had been rewritten, and she had become an example of how ambition can lead to ruin. But Maverick knew the truth. He knew she had died a hero, not a foolhardy one. And he was determined to make sure the world knew it too. He closed his eyes, the images of that day replaying in his mind. The blue sky, the rising phoenix, Valkyrie's voice, the panic in the tower, the final silence. It was a tragedy, yes, but also a story of courage and sacrifice. And Maverick, the keeper of untold memories, felt it his duty to honor that courage, to unearth that sacrifice, and finally, to give voice to the legend that had been silenced. He stood, determination renewed in his eyes. Part 3 of the script was complete, and with it, the painful reconstruction of the day of the fall. Now it was time to unravel the conspiracy, to expose those responsible for the cover-up, and to fight to restore Valkyrie's honor. The journey would be perilous, but the truth, he knew, was the only thing that truly mattered. Maverick knew that Valkyrie's story was a mirror of the very nature of war and power. Secrets were weapons, and truth was often the first casualty. But he also believed in the resilience of the human spirit, in the ability to fight for justice even when the odds were overwhelming. Valkyrie had fought to the end, and he would do the same for her. He looked out at the ocean, the waves crashing against the shore, a constant reminder of the relentless force of nature. The truth, like the ocean, could be held back for a time, but eventually, it would find its way to the surface. And when it did, the world would finally know the true story of the legend that had been buried. Maverick felt a weight on his chest. Reconstructing the day of Valkyrie's fall had been painful, but necessary. Now the real battle began, unraveling the web of lies that had been woven to bury the truth. He knew he would not be alone in this journey. Injustice cried out for justice, and there were brave souls who, like him, refused to accept the official version. His first clue came from an unexpected source, an anonymous email. The sender identified himself only as Icarus, and the content was cryptic, but direct. Find the engineer who built the wings. He knows what broke them. Maverick immediately thought of Aris Thorn, the chief engineer of Project Phoenix. Thorn had been a staunch supporter of Valkyrie, and Maverick remembered how his voice had been silenced after the incident. Finding him would be the next crucial step. Maverick tapped into his old contacts, a network of former pilots, technicians, and bureaucrats who, like him, had been marginalized by the system. It took weeks, but he finally located Thorn in a small town in the countryside, living a reclusive life far from anything that resembled aviation. When Maverick found him, Thorn was a broken man, haunted by the ghosts of his past. His eyes, once bright with a passion for engineering, now held the melancholy of one who had witnessed too much. Their first meeting was tense. Thorn was reluctant to speak, fearing the consequences. He had been threatened, his career destroyed, his reputation tarnished. But Maverick, with his persistence and promise to finally bring the truth to light, managed to break through Thorn's barrier of fear and despair. The engineer, his voice breaking, began to recount the events that led to the Valkyrie's downfall, revealing a conspiracy that went far beyond a simple design flaw. Thorn confirmed Maverick's suspicions. The failure of the Phoenix's flight control systems was no accident. It was sabotage. He had discovered evidence that malicious code had been inserted into the aircraft's control software, designed to cause a catastrophic failure at a critical moment. The goal was not only to destroy the Phoenix, but also to discredit the Valkyrie, making it an example of how unbridled ambition could lead to ruin. But why? Thorn's answer was shocking. Project Phoenix was not just a fighter jet. It was a platform for ultra-advanced surveillance technology, capable of gathering data from anywhere in the world without detection. This technology, if it fell into the wrong hands, could destabilize the global balance of power. And there was a faction within the government itself, led by Colonel Silas Vance, that wanted this technology exclusively for itself, without the oversight or control of any other agency. Vance, with his insatiable thirst for power, saw the Phoenix as the key to a new era of military dominance. He cared nothing for risk, human life, or ethics. To him, Valkyrie was an obstacle, a pilot who asked too many questions, who worried about safety and morality. She was a threat to his vision of a future where he controlled the flow of information and, by extension, the world. Thorn revealed that Vance had ordered the insertion of the malicious code and that Shadow Thorn, Aris's jealous cousin, had been the one to execute it. Shadow, blinded by jealousy and the promise of a meteoric career under Vance's wing, had betrayed his own family and his own principles. He had manipulated the Phoenix's systems, ensuring that the failure occurred at the exact moment Valkyrie was performing the high G maneuver, making the failure irretrievable. Maverick felt a wave of nausea. The betrayal went even deeper than he had imagined. Valkyrie had not simply been the victim of an accident, she had been sacrificed on the altar of ambition and power. Her death was not a mistake, but an assassination orchestrated to protect a secret that could change the world. Thorn, her voice breaking, described Valkyrie's struggle to control the Phoenix. She knew something was wrong, that the craft was behaving abnormally. But she did not know that she was fighting an unseen enemy, a malicious code that was systematically disabling its control systems. Still, she did not give up. She used her intuition, her experience, her sheer willpower to try to save the craft. But when she realized it was hopeless, that the Phoenix was doomed, she made the final decision. She did not eject. She did not try to save herself. Instead, she used her last moments to guide the Phoenix away from any populated area into a remote desert, ensuring that the explosion would not cause innocent casualties. She had sacrificed her life to protect civilians and her reputation to protect the secret of Project Phoenix from falling into the wrong hands. She knew that if the surveillance technology was exposed, it could be replicated by enemies, leading to an unprecedented information war. Maverick listened to Thorn's story with a heavy heart. Valkyrie was not just a legend, she was a martyr. Her sacrifice had been silenced, her honor tarnished, all to protect the agenda of corrupt men. Maverick's anger was palpable, but so was a new determination. He would not just unearth the truth, he would shout it from the rooftops, ensuring that Valkyrie's sacrifice would not be in vain. Thorn handed Maverick a flash drive containing all the evidence he had collected over the years. Communication logs, software code, crash analysis reports, and even a recording of a conversation between Vance and Shadow discussing the sabotage plan. It was the irrefutable proof Maverick needed. But he knew that presenting this evidence would be dangerous. Vance and his allies would not hesitate to silence him, just as they had silenced Valkyrie and Thorn. Maverick spent days analyzing the data on the flash drive, confirming every detail of Thorn's story. The complexity of the sabotage was terrifying, the cold-bloodedness of the conspirators revolting. He discovered that Vance had planned to use the Phoenix's technology to create a global surveillance network, controlling information and influencing political events around the world. Valkyrie, with her unshakable integrity, had become an obstacle to this plan and therefore needed to be eliminated. He also discovered that the Phoenix's surveillance technology was even more advanced than Thorn had imagined. It not only collected data, but was also capable of manipulating electronic systems from a distance, making it an invisible and devastating weapon. Valkyrie, in her last moments, had managed to disable the most dangerous part of this technology, rendering it inoperable before the crash. Her sacrifice was not just to prevent civilian casualties, but to protect the world from a weapon that could have been used for evil. Maverick felt a deep respect for Valkyrie. She had fought to her last breath, not for personal glory, but for the greater good. Her legend was not just about her skill as a pilot, but about her courage, her integrity, and her sacrifice. He knew the truth about her would come as a shock to many, but it was a truth that needed to be told. He began to plan his next steps. He couldn't simply hand over the evidence to the authorities. Vance had allies at every level of government, and the evidence could easily be suppressed. He needed a plan, something that would expose the truth in an undeniable way, reach the public, and force an independent investigation. Maverick thought of an investigative journalist he knew, Sarah Jenkins. She was ruthless, fearless, and had a reputation for not bowing to political pressure. He knew she would be the right person to break Valkyrie's story, but he also knew it would involve her in immense danger. He would have to protect her, just as Valkyrie had protected the world. He sat back in his chair, the flash drive in his hands. The truth was a powerful weapon, and he was about to use it. Part 4 of the script was complete, and with it, the shocking revelation of the conspiracy and Valkyrie's sacrifice. The stage was set for the final showdown, where the truth would finally emerge from the shadows. Maverick looked out at the ocean, the waves crashing against the shore, a constant reminder of the relentless force of nature. The truth, like the ocean, could be held back for a time, but eventually it would find its way to the surface. And when it did, the world would finally know the true story of the legend that had been buried. He knew the journey would be perilous, but the truth, he knew, was the only thing that truly mattered. Valkyrie had fought to the end, and he would do the same for her. Her honor, her legacy, depended on it. And Maverick, the keeper of untold memories, was ready for the final battle. With the truth about Valkyrie and Vance's conspiracy in his hands, Maverick knew the final battle was about to begin. He had promised himself that Evelyn Reed's honor would be restored, and that her sacrifice would not be in vain. Part 4 had revealed the depth of the betrayal and the extent of the cover-up, and now was the time to bring it all to light, no matter the cost. Maverick contacted Sarah Jenkins, the investigative journalist. He knew she was the only one with the courage and integrity to take on such an explosive story. The meeting was held in a discreet location, a cafe on a busy street where conversation could be lost in the hustle and bustle of the city. Maverick handed her Thorne's flash drive, explaining the history of Valkyrie, Project Phoenix, Vance and Shadow's sabotage, and Evelyn's ultimate sacrifice. Sarah listened with silent intensity, her eyes fixed on Maverick, absorbing every word, every detail. She was a professional, and her initial reaction was skepticism. Conspiracy stories were common, but one of this magnitude, involving such powerful figures, was almost unbelievable. But the passion in Maverick's eyes, the wealth of detail, and the evidence on the flash drive slowly convinced her. She knew she had the story of a lifetime in her hands, one that could shake the foundations of military and political power. Sarah began her own investigation, using the clues provided by Maverick and Thorne. She checked every document, every recording, every testimony. With every step, Maverick's story was confirmed, and Vance's web of lies began to unravel. She met other former Phoenix Project employees who, emboldened by the promise of justice, began to speak out. The truth, like an underground river, was finally finding its way to the surface. Sarah's first story was an earthquake. Published in a major newspaper, it detailed Evelyn Reed's life and career, Project Phoenix, the classified incident, and the first evidence of sabotage. Its impact was immediate. The public, which had accepted the official version for years, was shocked. The aviation community, which had mourned Valkyrie's downing but accepted the narrative of her mistake, began to question it. The pressure on the Pentagon and the government increased exponentially. Vance and his allies tried to fight back. They discredited Sarah, accusing her of sensationalism and spreading conspiracy theories. They tried to silence Maverick and Thorne, using threats and intimidation. But it was too late. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and the truth, once exposed, was difficult to contain. Other media outlets began to investigate, and the Valkyrie story became a national phenomenon. Maverick and Thorn, with Sarah's help, continued to provide evidence, exposing corruption and treason. The net was closing in on Vance and Shadow. Public opinion turned against them, and even their closest allies began to drift away. Justice, albeit slow, was finally coming. The climax of the revelation came with the release of an audio recording, obtained by Sarah, in which Vance and Shadow openly discussed the sabotage of the Phoenix and the plan to discredit Valkyrie. Shadow's voice, full of envy and resentment, and Vance's cold, calculating nature, were undeniable. The recording was the final piece of evidence, the straw that broke the camel's back. Colonel Silas Vance and Captain Marcus Shadow Thorn were arrested and charged with sabotage, conspiracy, and murder. The trial was a media spectacle, with Maverick and Aris Thorn testifying, and Sarah Jenkins covering every detail. The truth about Evelyn Valkyrie Reed was finally revealed to the world. She was no reckless pilot. She was a hero, a martyr, who had sacrificed her life to protect her country and the world from dangerous technology and corrupt men. The backlash was immense. Valkyrie's reputation was restored, and she was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the United States' highest military honor. Her name was engraved on monuments, and her story became a beacon of courage and sacrifice. Project Phoenix was shut down, and a full investigation was launched into the surveillance practices and use of military technology. Justice had been served, and Valkyrie's legacy was secure. Maverick, in his retirement, visited Valkyrie's memorial. It was a simple but dignified place, with a statue of Evelyn in her flight suit, looking up at the sky. He touched her name, etched into the cold stone, feeling a mixture of sadness and pride. The battle had been won, but the loss was still palpable. He remembered her smile, the passion in her eyes, her unwavering determination. She had flown higher than anyone else, and her light, though dimmed for a time, now shone brighter than ever. He thought of all the untold stories, all the forgotten heroes, all the buried secrets. Valkyrie's story was just one of them, but it was a powerful reminder that the truth, no matter how difficult, always finds its way, and that there is always someone, like him, willing to fight for it. Maverick looked up at the sky, where the clouds moved slowly as if carrying the memories of all those who had flown before. He felt Valkyrie's presence, not as a ghost, but as an inspiration. She had taught him that true courage lay not just in flying, but in standing up for what was right, even when the whole world was against you. He turned to the camera, his blue eyes reflecting the wisdom of a life lived on the edge and the serenity of one who had found peace. His voice, softer now, but still filled with authority, echoed in the air. A message to all who dared to dream, to all who sought the truth, to all who believed that some stories should never be buried. Some ghosts don't haunt us. They protect us. If this story moved you, let us know below. And don't forget to subscribe for the next declassified Maverick file. Maverick smiled, a smile that carried the melancholy of the past and the hope of the future. The legend of Valkyrie had been revived, and her legacy would live on forever, a beacon of courage and truth in the Maverick Chronicles. And he, Pete Mitchell, the Maverick, would continue to tell these stories, one by one, ensuring that no legend would be forgotten and no truth would remain buried.